Do you recall somewhere in Genesis where it says the same thing? Where a slimy serpent appeared to Eve and said, "You will not surely die, but you will become like gods." One thing I find in the whole entertainment industry, that's a very common theme, especially in movies, music, and the gaming industry. They all, especially like in the gaming industry, for example, I played this game once called Event Rising, where the whole theme of the game is about elevating yourself up through psychic powers until you get to this point where you become a god man. And that's one of the things Elvis believed in. And we know that this isn't the spirit of God. It's not the same spirit that God portrayed in the Bible. There is only one God, one Jesus, one Christ, one Lord. Here's another quote from Good Housekeeping magazine. "I saw hundreds of concert goers carrying their sick or crippled children rush up to Elvis on stage crying out, 'Elvis, please touch my baby.'" See, a lot of these people believed that Elvis had healing powers. And that's true because a lot of his songs were Christian songs. So all these people out there saw him singing these Christian songs, and he was usually a lovely young cut boy, didn't look like he was someone that you wouldn't want to bring home to your mother, kind of thing. So they saw him and they went, "This is a great man, and look how many people he's just bringing together. He's singing Christian songs every now and then." And a lot of them thought that he was like a type of Christ. So they would bring their children to him for him to heal them. Larry Geller goes on to say, "Elvis claimed that his mission was to use his name and influence to initiate people into the spiritual world of which he was being used." I wonder which spirit world he was being used by. He claimed that this voice was using him as a channel to reach millions of people through the universal language of music. So I wonder, even Elvis believes that he was being used for a greater purpose. I wonder whose greater purpose he was serving. Now it's interesting. At Elvis's concerts sometimes, especially in Las Vegas, he would get up on stage. Halfway through singing and stuff like that, he'd start going through a book. And he'd start reading it to all the masses, all of his fans and audience that was there. And he'd just be giving them little snippets from this book and teaching them, you could almost say preaching to them from this stage. Now the interesting thing about this was that book he was reading from was called The Voice. It was called the New Age Voice. Now to understand where Elvis was coming from and what he was into, and whether all of these accounts were truly Christian accounts, we need to have a look into this voice and see exactly what gospel Elvis was trying to preach to all the masses. Her name was Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, and she was one of the leading occultists of the 18th century. It's because of her that we now have, you could say, the New Age movement, the whole teachings of this future New Age Christ coming. And she received a lot of visions and stuff like that, and even the date she received these visions and got all these dictations and automatic writings was a very interesting date. It was in 1831. And don't we as Adventists know that something very important happened in 1844? At the same time God was revealing messages to his prophet, do you think that Satan could have been preparing his side of things as well? That's an interesting thought. Well, Helena Blavatsky, she was one of the leading occultists that started up this whole New Age teaching, you could say. And just to give you an idea of what she taught and what her fruits were, so you can know what Elvis's fruits would be, we have a look at what she says. Here in her writings, The Secret Doctrine, she says, "Satan is that angel who was proud enough to believe himself God, brave enough to buy his independence at the price of eternal suffering and torture." What kind of fruits does that tell you about Helena Blavatsky? She goes on to say, Satan, the serpent of Genesis, is the real creator and benefactor, the father of spiritual mankind. And who was the first to whisper, in the day ye eat thereof, and shall be as Elohim, knowing good and evil, can only be regarded in light of a Savior. So from the horse's mouth, here Helena Blavatsky says that Lucifer is the real Savior of this world. Now, whose fruits? Who is she worshipping? Who is her true God? It is Satan or Lucifer. Here's one of Elvis's costumes he used to wear on stage. Now, a lot of people wouldn't think too much of it. But this starts to show you some of his fruits. Because these same ascended masters, or these New Age Christs that Helena Blavatsky taught that would come in the future to lead mankind back into an enlightened age, in other words, false Christ coming to destroy mankind, these same beings were actually drawn down, or someone drew pictures of them, what they looked like, people who had obviously done automatic writing. And apparently this is what one of them was called, Saint Germain, and that's what he looked like. It's interesting, Elvis's costumes themselves, they looked very much like what these ascended masters. And considering Elvis Presley was reading the New Age, the voice prophecy book from his platform when he was on stage indoctrinating people with these satanic beliefs, he's dressing like these ascended masters that Helena Blavatsky said would eventually come back and relieve mankind. Shows me in a way of who his true master was, who he was really following. But don't just take my word for it. Let's have a look what he says himself. Here's a quote from Elvis Presley. He says, "Someday in the near future, we'll see how the so-called ministers of God react as they see their worn-out ways and the whole old age start crumbling. They'll all get theirs. I can't wait till this new age comes." So who was Elvis Presley's true master? Was he really Christian? One thing that many people don't realize about Elvis Presley when he actually died. A lot of people know that he died in the bathroom, and when the autopsy report came in, he had many different drugs in his stomach, and they believe that that's what killed him. But the other thing that they don't usually know about him was that in his hand when he died was one of Helena Blavatsky's occult books on sex and magic. Did Lucifer come back to claim another one of his victims? Okay, what about the Beatles? Now, we all know of the Beatles, don't we? We probably all have listened to their music sometime in our life, or even the generation today still knows that these guys played a massive contribution to the whole music scene in the world. And you ask any artist, most of them were brought up on this music, and the whole reason why they wanted to become famous, and they eventually did make it, was because they saw these young guys and they were cool, they had the masses just flocking after them, and everyone wanted to be like the Beatles. So what about them? What was their fruits? What was behind their whole scene?